One of the things that separates me from some of the others of our species is my obsession with design. I tend to think about it a lot, and not just in how something is put together to make it look fancy or aesthetic and for it to catch your eye, but how the form meets the function. How much of it needs explanation or implication. I mean, sure, it comes down to what it looks like and if it's appealing to me, but even more so, is it serving what I'm wanting it to serve? Is it serving the function? And is it doing it in a way that I would say is elegant? But really, what goes to it and what I tend to think a lot about is harmony. Is the design harmonious and its application? Like, how does it fit in your hand? Does it just feel like it should be there? What about the function that it does? Is the function harmonious? Is it doing what it's supposed to do in a manner that without requiring too much effort? If you're rolling it down the street, how smooth is the action? How well does it play? And of course, obviously, the symmetry of the design. Is it seamless in its form? Is it appealing? An overused example of this is obviously Apple products. I wouldn't say necessarily all Apple products have today, but the classic Apple styling, the seamless design, the beveled, rounded edges, the way that it kind of looks like a little space agey. Really, what that is it's taking design cues from Zen, which is something that also Frank Lloyd Wright had done in his designs of buildings and architecture, especially after he had visited Japan. And the idea that Frank Lloyd Wright has with design, I think about quite a bit, which is how does it play into the environment? One of the things that was seemingly revolutionary when Frank Lloyd Wright was designing houses and buildings was having the building blend into its natural environment. He went so far as to even having buildings and houses incorporate trees, some of them in Oak Park even having the tree built around the roof. But it was also in the materials that were used. Are the materials natural to that place, into that environment? His iconic Falling Water house in Pennsylvania took stone quarried from the area so that it would look simpatico with where it was placed. Same goes for houses he built in Arizona or Los Angeles. He wanted to make sure that it looked as if it was in its place, something that in today's McMansions we certainly do not at all care about. And a very impactful book when I was first getting started in my career, and an iconic one when it comes to everything from software design, which is my world, through product design, industrial design, is the book The Design of Everyday Things, which when it came out in 1988 was an absolute heavyweight. It still is. It's classic up until and through today. And the tenet of it is essentially how something is designed is much more than is it put together well. Is it aesthetic? Is it functional? So a perfect example of this is you're going up to a door. If the handle of the door is horizontal, you know to push it. If it's vertical, you know to pull it. That is a beautiful use of design. And in an everyday thing, one of the examples that he uses in which it tends to go awry is clock radios, which in today's world, we don't really use clock radios anymore. But you could use it in car interfaces or any of the number of these interfaces that we use, everything from a smart coffee maker all the way through opening a package. Does it make sense? Can I just use it or do I need an instruction manual? One of his big things is, that's not, you need an instruction manual for everything. I think about a lot of products in which I've returned because I take it out of the box and it requires me to understand this long step of series of things in order to be able to use it. I should be able to just use it. I shouldn't need instructions. Which ultimately means in this design aesthetic, one of the principles of it is a lot of psychology. What's human nature? What are expectations? What are we going to naturally be gravitating towards? How are we going to play with something? What's our tolerance for playing with it? What's our tolerance for playing with it without breaking it? All of that ends up being a pretty big tenet of design, which has infected everything. Everything from Tinder's swiping through a lot of industrial design to make things more ergonomic. It's even a selling point for a lot of more luxury items. You tend to have to pay for this type of understanding to be baked into the design. What I'm thinking a lot about after this conversation is how the user experience design, coming from Don Norman, coming from the design of everyday things, is impeccable. And for today's complex world, we need another layer around that onion. Yeah, it needs to make sense. It needs to be able to be used in a functional manner without much instruction. How it is used should be considered. which before that book was seen as rather banal and boring. But now it seems like there needs to be more banality brought into it, which is how are we sourcing the parts that are going to get into this? Where are we getting it from? What's the product's lifespan? How easy is it going to be to disassemble and bring it back to nothingness of which it became? We talk a lot about sustainability, but not much of that actually reaches the product design, let alone thinking about the interconnected web that is our global infrastructure. What's it going to take to get everything here in order to build it? And then what thoughts do I need to put into it of when it's done being used? I wonder if some of Frank Lloyd Wright's ideas of interconnecting it, making it more seamless with its environment, needs to be brought in, and in more than just how it looks on the horizon, and probably with more forethought as well, because I've been told that his houses are quite leaky. I wanted to talk with this episode's guest, Thomas Waits, who is a designer and artist, because he had a project that I had come across of trying to build a toaster from scratch himself. This is everything from mining the materials to putting the wire together, all the way up to building a toaster, which unceremoniously exploded upon using it for the first time. But he had gone through an exercise of really labor intensively understanding, even learning 15th century peasant activities of smelting iron to see if he could put together this rather banal industrial product. And in today's ever decreasing and shrinking world, both because getting things from across any amount of the oceans is easy, but also because it's becoming harder, I thought it'd be interesting to talk to him in light of what's happening in our contemporary times with tariffs and trade wars, but also what's happening in the longer tail. How can we keep this pace of bringing everything together to make sure that I can have a $10 toaster whenever I want without having to learn 15th century peasant techniques? I knew I'd come my way with something different than when I go into it, which is what I really love about doing these. I go into it without expectations, and what I came out with was a delighted idea of perhaps the design of everyday things needs a logistics update. Not really having any solutions to that, but perhaps the thought is how might we make design principles that are as simple as a doorway opening and closing to how better source and build our products so the long tail of the world and the reality that this is going to live in is considered, so that maybe it's not toxically leaching chemicals into the environment, or maybe that it's not only having a lifespan of a few hours or moments or minutes. Because we can continue going on the pace that we're going, we're probably going to end up in a much murkier and darker world than I would like it to be. Thank you for the guest, Thomas, for coming in and talking with me. It was a delightful conversation. Thank you all for listening. Wherever this reaches you on our big, blue, beautiful planet. Hope you're doing well. All right, I got to do that cliche thing before the episode starts. If you like what you're hearing, please follow the show on whatever platform you're hearing it through. And if you would, give us a rating as well, as both of those help keep the show going and get it found. One last thing. If you want to submit a topic for me to cover, throw me a person you want me to interview or talk with, even if you want to talk with me, or you just want to tell me how terrible of a job I did on something, check out bandwidth.productions to visit the site and drop us a note. All right, sweet. Well, thank you very much again. Would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Thomas Waits. I'm a design researcher based in London.
Sweet. So the question I like to ask folks when they first come on is, what do you like to do that makes you happy?
Yeah. Well, I'm in London. I grew up here in the UK, so I'm going to say go to the pub. um, Sadly, but I don't get to do that as much as I, once did. I've got 2 children now, so they make me happy some of the time as well.
It's funny how the things that make are the most work. They provide the most amount of happiness, but in the most fleeting amount of times.
Yeah, I think like happiness for me, it always comes with like work
Yeah.
somehow. I think, yeah, that feeling of like, yeah, I've done something that's cool. That is like, yeah, doing something well, hopefully, or not well, but something interesting.
Yeah.
That is, I guess, sort of comes with happiness. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've actually thought about this a lot. I mean, I asked the question, I suppose, and so I've heard 70 odd people on this show. I asked it to, but then I came from it from like traveling a lot, and I'd be like stuck in queues or next to people in airplanes, and I hate banal talk. So I always think this is like my escape rope into something more substantial.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but I've thought about this. Like I thought about like delight. Like what is delight? Oh, delight is you can't have delight without surprise. Like you need to be surprised about something, and then there's delight, right? Like, and I thought about how happiness is we chase it, but it's really something that's small and quick because and it usually comes at the end of something that you have to wait for or is grueling. Like I can't think of a time that I've been like actually happy that didn't involve some amount of effort.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Maybe it's just um, my my present kind of navigation of like stress, but I always think of like associate happiness as some feeling of like relief after getting something done, which has, which I've worked out how to do it, or, phew, at least that's over. And then there's like this moment of kind of happiness before like the next thing kind of kicks in. So yeah, that's for me, it's like this wave of like stress, relief, happiness, then more stress, relief, happiness.
Yeah, which is kind of like the state of being for humans. I thought about this. That I wrote this down the other day, mostly because I'm just giving myself a hard time. But it was happiness is those fleeting moments that you're always chasing, or after a second cup of coffee.
Right. Yeah. 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 Back when I used to go to the pub more, etc., etc. Yeah. After the second pint, that's a moment of happiness. Sure.
Yeah, and then the third pint is when you start arguing, and it gets a little bit more intense. And then the fourth pint, your eyes
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so I found you from I don't remember where the post was. I tend to just clear my cache and forget how I come across most things. I think it was LinkedIn of all bullshit places, but it was about the toaster that you did
Yeah.
and how to give it like my attempt at a pithy description of it is you set out to mine the materials, construct it, put it together, and make toaster that you would have got for like £4 or like $8 at a store, and that you went about doing it through some considerable effort, and then when you plugged it in and started using it imploded. Is am I
Yeah.
getting it about right?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So this project was a while ago for me. I it began, I think, with that sort of idea that okay, I'm kind of in the design world, or like I want that to be my career. Um, shouldn't I at least make one thing entirely myself at one point during my life? Um, and it's sort of maybe kind of related to that, perhaps like slightly macho thing of like, oh yeah, if you eat meat, you need to at least have killed an animal at least once, like with your bare hands, kind of thing, or whatever. Um, and yeah, and as I mentioned, it was a while ago for me. I was a bit like younger and more foolish, and so yeah, I thought like, yeah, I should make one thing entirely myself from scratch, and so yeah, I decided I would try and make a simple, cheap electric toaster entirely myself from the ground up. Yeah.
What did you walk away with as far as an impression of the world we live in and how much we're dependent on other? Like, okay, so like, all right, so I work in tech, like we had said, and like ever more the years that I worked in it, you need newer things in order to be able to do whatever it is that you're trying to do, like AI, right? Like now you need like GPUs, and you need equipment that makes things at the molecular level to make that happen, which invariably means you need very specialized equipment that only a few people in the world do, and even then it takes forever to do it. And I'm wondering like what your thoughts came away from it as far as the interconnectivity and the reliance upon each other so far down the chain to make something as simple as a it's mimicking fire over a stove.
Yeah. um, I mean, I think even when I would like set out to do the project, I wasn't like completely naive about this kind of thing. Like, um, I wanted to make like a sort of technological object. So I didn't want to make a basket completely myself, or I didn't want to make like a hand forged knife, you know, completely myself. And so what I was trying to do with the project was get at this like complexity of modern life. And so I picked this object which I thought I would have like a decent chance of like actually being able to make. I didn't pick like something, well, I thought I wasn't picking something with a, microchip in it. Turns out toasters these days do have like a microchip in them, and so
Everything does now, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, so the project was intended to get at this idea of like the insanely complex nature of like the modern world. Um, I think, but it's sort of we've people have been kind of discussing that for a long time. There's like a famous essay called "I Pencil." Have you ever heard of this?
I saw it from your website on this, but I
Right. Yeah.
actually haven't read it.
Okay. So similar thing. This economist. Oh God, I forget the name. Um, Famous economist wrote this famous essay called "I Pencil," where he like describes from the perspective of a simple like graphite pencil how insanely complex graphite pencil is to produce, and no one person could produce this thing. So yeah, so I was trying to get at the complexity of the modern world, also definitely coming at it from like a sustainability aspect, which is like the world is insanely complex, and we're trying to like change this like super tanker, the direction of this like super tanker of complexity, and it's just extremely difficult to do. And I know that the cheapness of things like toasters is like wonderful on the one hand because of this complexity and all this like high specialization in the economy, but it's also like we're heading towards disaster. Like it seems clear to me now that like just like rolling disasters brought on by climate change is sort of our future. And so I was trying to like get at this complexity and also get at the like the cheapness of things, and how like it's wonderful that you can buy a toaster for a few bucks. It makes your life slightly better, but also at that like worry about like how can this thing which has got so much in it, so much energy in it, only cost a few bucks. And so it was, yeah, these were the conversations I was trying to have with like this absurd idea to try and make an electric toaster myself.
Do you still think about it in that sense? Because like some of the things that's more in the zeitgeist now is the okay. All right, let me preface it with this. There's a trend actually that's been happening for longer than the moment, which is the retreating of globalization, and it's actually a trend that's been happening. I mean, COVID kind of was like a big blip,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been happening further back than you might actually realize. There's a couple geopolitical guys and economists who've been talking about this. They've been kind of like dark horses for many years. Now all of a
Yeah,
sudden they're becoming much more popular because it's like, oh, you've been talking about this for a while.
yeah.
And the way that some of the folks talk about it is more like a demographics and resource extraction type of thing, as well as just like the cost of the in geopolitics is called the global maritime order, which is like
Mm.
U.S. Navy controls the shipping lanes, and then everyone just kind of can do whatever they want. And then if some rebel somewhere do something, they'll just go blow them up, right? Like that's like one part of it, but it's
that's in my
Yeah,
world, that's actually much too much of a distillation because it's not just the U.S. military doing it. But
yeah,
anyways,
yeah,
I
yeah,
digress.
yeah.
Um, and there's this trend of globalization's kind of retracting, and that's going to lead to all these different kind of crazy things. Like one of the things that's been talked about, which you're already starting to see, is you're not going to have microchips and everything because resources are going to be more difficult. It's going to be more costly, both from energy and all that transporting things. And then nowadays, with somebody that you can put a lot of adjectives in front of in the White House, uh, is rapidly making things a lot more difficult and interesting with like this the big T word. So I'm curious if that sparked kind of thinking about this in a different way, and you're because like the thing is like you had such an intimate workings of this, right? Like when I was reading through this stuff, I was like, man, I could probably build a toaster from half the stuff I have here in my house just from being like a mad scientist. But going through the process of trying to make the wires and all that stuff, like you went through it like a much more intimate way. And I'm curious if the current zeitgeist is causing you either to think about this again, or in the process of doing this in the context of today, if you've thought about it I would imagine a unique perspective.
Yeah. You, so one of the things I did was, I was trying to make steel, um, and there's steel inside an electric toaster. So going on this journey to like try and make my own steel. So and you kind of think that you know how to make steel somehow. And also, I kind of thought, like, yeah, steel's been around for millennia. It's a well understood material. So there's got to be, sort of got to be simple somehow. No, it's of course, like steel making today is just incredibly complex. And so you end up like when you're like working on a scale of yourself or like on this small scale, you end up kind of going back in time for the information that you need to make steel on a scale that that it was once made on. um, and so when you're talking about the scale of a single person, I ended up going all the way back to like the 14th century, this kind of early text on, first written in Latin, all about kind of mining and metallurgy and peasants kind of creating iron and so that's sort of the level of technology you can kind of manage when you're doing it yourself. And so I was doing this in my back garden in like suburban London, and the neighbours were like looking over the fence,
They're
as
just
all
hearing it
this,
killed, fire going.
yeah, exactly. It's like I'm shoveling kind of carbon and steel in, and like got this kind of air blowing and like noxious fumes kind of coming off and all of that kind of stuff. It's loud and it's kind of smelly. Um, and yeah, and of course, we've like exported all of that, or kind of certainly in the UK we have, and yeah, um, and yeah, exported it and concentrated it in certain areas of the world, and so yeah, so I guess in terms of like I don't know deglobalization, I
Really, in
think
terms of like the fragility is really what I'm getting at, right? Is like, did it give you a sense of perspective of there's so much effort being put into things that are seemingly banal?
yeah, oh yeah, completely, but there's also that kind of difficult question of like what counts as banal, which and like the only it's just this like the economy is meant to be anyway, this like choice machine about like, okay, well, it turns out people do want to spend money on toasters. They don't find them banal, like, or they find them, worth about this much money. And so like, I'm not particularly interested in like, this was a discussion I kind of had in the book, which was like, oh, when all of this kind of the effort that we put into this stuff kind of became clear to me, and I like viscerally felt like, oh my god, like we put all of this effort into creating these objects which like last for a couple of years, and then we throw them in the, if they're lucky, in the kind of recycling sort of bin, and then they get mashed up and basically kind of downcycled in terms of the plastics at least, and so on. So yeah, so and so I was like, all of this is happening, and everything's so cheap, and we're like, heading in this direction which is unsustainable. Um, what are we going to do? Like, oh yeah, okay, well let's, okay, we can somehow decide, okay, toasters are too banal, hair straighteners are too banal, I don't know, whatever. I'm not a big hair straightener fan, but of course, for some people, they will like spend a lot of money on hair straighteners, and also like people who don't have much disposable income, they want hair straighteners too, or whatever. I don't use hair straighteners. Uh, Strangely enough, I don't even make toast that often, but it's like, so yeah, so the economy is meant to be this way of deciding what's banal and what isn't banal, without a kind of a despot deciding that for us.
Yeah.
And so then you get into stuff about environmental economics, which is like trying to send price signals by putting up, including the cost of externalities, the cost of the pollution, the cost of the environmental degradation which is happening somewhere. You kind of try and include that in the price of the object, and so and that's the free market and it's meant to work. But yeah, don't know, those price signals I don't think are in the objects.
Oh, they're most certainly not.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
most certainly not.
yeah.
No, and I mean, like, one of the things that globalization brought is, like, you even played upon it, is you just offload that to another place. Like, this is something that's happened a lot with fast fashion, actually, in the U.S.
Mm,
So, like, there used to be all these textile mills in, North and South Carolina, and then they exported all those to Southeast Asia. And part of the reason some companies did that, which inevitably, in like a unintended consequence, led to some of this fast fashion stuff, is
mm.
they couldn't use the same chemicals anymore they were using.
Right. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, oh, let's just put this in a country where we can use those chemicals. We don't
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
change anything other than the location.
Yeah.
Let's price in the cost of shipping. And then over the years of doing that, oh, we've actually reduced the labor costs over there and the shipping costs have gone down. Well, now we
Yeah.
can actually make things faster, cheaper, and whatever. And yeah,
Yeah.
you never actually got to the underlying thing of you're still poisoning a river. It's just in a different place now.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. And it's like,
The other thing too that's just kind of on the
for me, like fast fashion is unequivocally bad. Like,
yeah.
but I also, it's like I'm also sort of vaguely aware that I'm in like my own kind of bubble, and it's a bit of a like a worried kind of concerned bubble, and there's like you know young people out there who just like love Temu and just don't have a care in the world and about any of these things that are like really sort of important. um and I'm trying to, you know yeah, and how do you bring those people into the conversation as well, and like not end up in this like really, I don't know, like
This is how
dull,
you should
yeah.
be doing. This is what you should be
Yeah,
doing.
yeah, exactly,
What the fuck
yeah,
is wrong with you? Yeah, yeah, no, I
yeah,
totally
yeah,
get it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Some of that's just the youth, though. I mean, youth is gonna. I mean, like, I go back and like read things that were written in the '60s, and they're just raging on. the youth, and they're gonna just be lazy, and it's like so many of the same things. Some of
Yeah,
it is
yeah, 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 yeah.
they're
And so
young, of course they're gonna be.
avoiding that is like, and yeah, and I think actually, yeah, the old toaster project did kind of avoid it a bit because, yeah, because it's such a ridiculous project. It took me like about a year to, to make this electric toaster. Um, and yeah, and it was great. It was like interesting. I was doing sort of other stuff as well, but it was like, yeah, how do you make wire? And and so it was one of the really nice things about it was the realization that in all of these very high tech objects, we can kind of like link through time as well. Not kind of just space across like the kind of globalized world, but you can kind of this like wonderful sense of incremental progress, and these people dedicating their careers, their entire lives to like improving the process for this particular material, and like having a real this sort of like joyful, almost like the the like taking a bit of joy in like the expertise and just kind of dedication of like people throughout history, and all of that kind of stuff, to creating this sort of progress. It was a really nice thing, and so yeah, so
I would imagine. I mean, especially like some of the things I was seeing. You mentioned it as well, of like 15th century techniques and all that kind of thing. Like that had to be wild. Like there's like I think it's the ancient Greeks where they talk about like all technology is actually just fire. It's just another way of manipulating fire. And it's kind of goofy to think about even now. It's actually kind of the basis for a lot of shit still. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
in some way, it's like, oh, you need to burn coal or natural gas to make the energy, which then you transmit on wires, which you use fire to melt. I mean, it's just like it's weird how it really does stack up. And when you get back down, it's like a caveman whittling some sticks that helps you get to where you are, all the way up to like some guy that has spent, like you said, his whole life just trying to figure out what's the best way to wrap copper into a wire, which then has the least amount of loss in energy, and then now we just use it for everything, and nobody has any
yeah,
idea of who
yeah,
they were. And
yeah,
it's also kind of wild, like there's explorers, like in, well, we call them explorers. I think it's a kind of a loaded term. I don't really like using it, but like the folks that went to the Amazon, the Spanish people who went to the Amazon or whatever,
yeah.
like you,
The colonizers,
yeah,
yeah,
they're colonizers. There we go.
yeah,
That's even a better one. Yeah, the
yeah,
conquerors that went through there. They'll like talk about, oh yeah, like we lost a couple ships, so we melted down all the nails, we made new nails and repurposed it, and we built another ship off of like cutting down trees and timbering them. It's just so wild to me that it's like, okay, yeah, but you guys are just a bunch of criminals who got like a get out of jail free card to go into the new world, and you have all these skills which seem so wild to us. And then
mm,
nowadays, like, could we at all be able to say our car broke down and then turn around and rebuild a car? Like, absolutely
mm,
not,
mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, mm. The fragility of like, yeah, you know, there was very recently a huge electrical outage in kind of Spain and Portugal. I guess you saw it in
Yeah.
the news, like, and suddenly everyone realizes cash is really important, kind of thing, because without fire, electricity, nothing works, and so even like the very kind of the basic sort of gears of human society, I guess, like the exchange of money, kind of broke down. Um, and yeah, so, but I think,
Do you ever think about how like oh, if you want to finish your thought, go ahead. And
well, I
I'll
was just
take
going
it
to
a
say,
different
it's like,
direction.
yes, okay, 14th century conquistadors melting down nails. yeah, I was just about able to kind of get to that level of technology, but then my toaster, I wanted it to have a plastic case, and I don't think there's any way that of course, I explored like, okay, plastic comes from fossil fuels. I need some ethane that I can then, crack into ethene and then sort of polymerize into polyethene or whatever. Like, I'm not a chemist, but like doing that in your kind of back garden, sort of that level of technology is definitely, it's not possible. And so, like, the complexity of like society went beyond that kind of idea of like, yeah, let's be worried about, we can't, fix our own TV kind of thing. It went beyond that kind of decade, centuries ago kind of thing. And so, I think this idea that we should be a bit kind of worried about like the uh, fragility of society. Yes, we should, but that doesn't mean we should like then jump to that naive idea that, oh yeah, and that means, everyone should be able to like fend for themselves. Like, that is we're so far beyond that, it's like absurd. So yeah, there needs to be redundancy built in, and like, and kind of systems and services which, you need to think about how fragile they are and how important they are. um, but yeah, that doesn't mean like let's all be self-sustainable and all of that kind of stuff, because like it or lump it, we are very much in this all together. The complexity, we're completely enmeshed with each other. um yeah, for better or worse, and I would kind of say better.
Yeah, I agree. No, I mean,
Yeah.
I think to me, like, this is probably just for my propensity for philosophy, but I always end up bringing it back to being like, well, this is actually a philosophical problem. Like, to me, it's like, should we have self reliance? Which there's a great essay from Emerson, Self Reliance, that I always go back to.
Mhm.
I think it's impeccable, which is essentially just like being the master of your own life is kind of the pithy way I would put it.
Mm.
And I think there's some of that we need again, right? So like if
Mm.
I think of like my grandfather, he passed away in like 2004, right? And he was like born on literally in a dirt floor, and he could just do so many things himself, right? And what I think about that gave him was an ability to like manipulate his world, but also have an understanding of like, well, what do I need to buy versus what do I just need to fix myself versus should I
Mm.
even buy that because it's going to break. And like, okay, so like a TV, should I buy a really expensive TV? Well, if a small component of it breaks, the whole thing's shit. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So should I just get a cheaper one? Because what's the point, anyways? Like, so there's like that kind of calculus, but then there's also the calculus of, in my mind, the philosophy of it is like the awareness. So like you got a really intimate awareness of like all that goes into making a toaster, right? And the point of banality is I think things are banal until you understand it. And like like there's like
Yeah.
a thing in like How to Win Friends and Influence People where he says like try to have a conversation with somebody and get to their own interests, because somebody could be talking about knitting and or making pottery or something that you have no interest in, but their passion and is going to spark of like all these details you didn't know about. And even if you never think about it again, the conversation will be interesting, right? So I
Yeah.
think there's some of that where like, should we, have more gardens in our backyard? Well, yeah, probably. Like you're going to have fresher food. It's, there's health benefits to it. You're going to be outside. You'll put your phone away for a little bit. That'll be nice. But also you'll have a much more intimate understanding of things.
Mm.
Like the farm that we buy our carrots from. One of the people there were telling my wife not too long ago of like how much they want to charge more for carrots because they're like, it's so much work, but no one would pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. So, having a better understanding of it's almost like having a better understanding of how dependent we are on each other. And, I think to kind of play off of what you're saying, I think to get to the next phase past this is probably going to be, we need to get closer in some ways, which is like we need more interdependency for how things get built in some ways. so they could be built longer, as opposed to now where everything's entirely propped up of, either planned obsolescence or it's cheap, so you don't have to um,
Yeah.
think about purchasing it, but then you also don't have to think about throwing it away.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I'm totally kind of with you in spirit. And, I'm kind of, teach industrial design, or teach on the industrial design course here at Centre St Martin's in London. And um, yeah, and there's some kind of great projects that I know about, which are, yeah, like kind of serviceable kind of computers and serviceable, um, you know, sort of high tech stuff. But then there's also like the kind of level down from that, like kind of washing machines and dishwashers, and there's some really interesting stuff about like a circular economy, and where instead of this linear economy from extraction to eventual like disposal in landfill, you have these kind of two economies sort of recirculating kind of organic material and sort of synthetic material in these clever ways. um, but
That's an interesting thought, because it also ends up meaning that you have to think about what you put into it the first time. Like if you're making a washing machine and you're putting in some type of paint into it, that's going to be a bitch to take out of it. It's like, okay, well, maybe we're going to have to rethink about that. So we put something that has like a slightly lower melting point or whatever it may be, so that I can get the steel back much easier. It's
Yeah,
an interesting way of
exactly.
framing it.
Yeah, and so like the complexity of the modern economy like comes into play again, and it's sort of like in the design world we have all these like great conversations about you know kind of making these steps towards a more sustainable material world, but it's proven incredibly difficult to do in practice because it seems to me like multiple interconnected things have to change at once. Um,
Are you?
because the kind of recycling plant has to be prepared for the
Yeah.
innovations which are coming from the other side of the world, and people aren't talking to each other, and so yeah,
Are,
and
are you familiar with complexity science?
a little bit,
Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah,
bring this up a lot, but the definition of it, there's Santa Fe Institute is the plug. If you want to dive into it, like anything Santa Fe Institute is really
mm,
great. There's a great book by Jeffrey West, Scale. It's like a good dip your toes into it. But like the way of just thinking about it is studying complex adaptive systems. So a
mm,
system is complex if it's adaptive. So like a way of thinking about it is like an ecosystem. An ecosystem is not a house of cards. So like for example, like you take out one organism from it or you introduce one organism to it, it's not necessarily going to collapse everything. It's going to change things,
mm.
right? So like honeysuckles. I have this thing where I want to murder all the honeysuckles. They're an invasive species by me, and they're
They
from
smell lovely though.
I hate them. I absolutely hate. I hate them with a burning passion. And the reason I do is because they're invasive where I'm from. They're from Japan.
Mhm,
So one of the things that they do is they first off they flower and they sprout their leaves much sooner in the cycle because they adapted to a different environment.
mhm,
They also grow really rapidly, but they grow out like a mushroom top, right? So
mhm,
that means that they end up essentially suffocating light from the canopy below them. So what you see in areas like in the forest by me that has
right.
honeysuckle is they just take over an area and then it's
Yeah,
just raw dirt underneath it,
yeah,
right? So they suffocate the areas and then they
yeah,
grow
yeah,
so fast and they propagate so well,
yeah,
partially because there's no bugs that eat them.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the
yeah.
other thing too that when it comes to invasive plants is plants and bugs are like an interesting species in which their ability to chemically break down um, their food is really tied to the species that they're with,
Mm, mm,
right? So like an interesting one that's like An asterisk is like crab apples. So you take a Chinese crab apple and put it in North America, and the bugs don't know a difference. Things like maple trees, and you bring in a Norwegian maple into North America, the bugs that eat sugar maples aren't going to be able to eat that,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So this is like another example of this complex adaptive system is that you're suffocating bugs, which ends up meaning you're going to reduce the bird population
Yeah.
because the young of birds only eat protein. So they only eat bugs and grubs and all that kind of stuff. They don't eat, seeds as they get to be adulthood, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, that's the summation that I usually use for this, right? And what you're describing here with the economy is that's like a complex adaptive system for humans par excellence, right?
Mm.
Uh, and the difficulty in kind of cracking it is you have to change multiple parts of this away, or you have to do something that causes the adaptation across all of it. But
Yeah.
the issue is that the specialization has been fractaled out into such ways that it's, I don't want to say it's impossible, but this is also why I go back to philosophy, because it's like if we changed our way of thinking and way we build things, we can build things more intentionally, and then we can kind of crack at it from just enough people doing it once,
Yeah.
as opposed to where I see this a lot is I even talked. I had like a consulting call with somebody recently, being like asking how to scale something, and it was recycling, and they're like, "Okay, but should I like focus on certain products?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, but is there a product that's ubiquitous enough, other than like aluminum cans, which is already kind of dominated, that you can put into the recycling structure to be able to collect it and sort it and not just spend all of your time literally making like a Rube Goldberg device to sort, I don't know, like plastic bottle caps or whatever it may be, right?"
Mm. Yeah. And so I, I like once. Yeah, I mean, so once upon a time there was. So how do you like change this like complex system? Um, and so once upon a time they, you know, there was like this kind of idea of like, yeah, consumer power, like, you sort of make sustainability like fashionable or something like that, and then that will be kind of
Yeah, this is like the Tom's footwear thing.
yeah,
If
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and that is great. But the trouble is it's like not mass market enough, and so it's great, but like, yeah, there's kind of pressure on large companies, and then like, I don't know, Apple, for example, like kind of high end luxury companies, let's say,
they're
or
not gonna give a fuck though. They're just gonna like find a way to brand it and make you think that they give a fuck.
yeah, yeah, of course, yeah, exactly. They can just brand it, and then what do you know without like spending a year investigating or something like that. Yeah, and it's great that there are these like smaller companies kind of producing things which generally come out a bit more expensive because they are made in this nice way, like the carrots, like and they're available only to like people with more disposable income. But it's like the rest of the market just like rolls on. And so how do you kind of change that, which is kind of the important part? And it has to be like regulation, because that's, I think, the only way that it would be forced to change. Like that would be the kind of the change in the environment, the change in the regulatory environment, which would then cause the kind of complex ecosystem to adapt, right?
But
And
it could force it in unintended ways though.
yeah, yeah, but uh,
So like the way that I think about this is like the pen and the sword.
yeah,
Like the pen is mightier than the sword.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So like the sword is regulation,
yeah,
right? And then the pen is like art. I feel like
yeah.
if you can make art or something that gets people to really like open up. Oh, so like okay,
It's so fickle though. Like trends, come and go. Like
that's why
the
artists come and go though, because we need the new ones. Are you
yeah,
familiar with
yeah,
like the
yeah,
book?
yeah. I know, but it's but like the kind of mass market stuff. Like what, I don't know if it like responds to trends that much, or and you're constantly seeing stuff which like at the high end in design is like, oh yeah, it's this like really beautifully produced kind of like recycled material with or reused material with like the kind of paint still partially on it, and like, oh yeah, we've made it into a new piece of furniture or whatever, great. But then like that gets to like the mass market, and it's instead of the recycled or reused kind of planks from the old ship or whatever, it's like kind of a PVC with a print on it of like flaky paint, that kind of, and so yeah, and it kind of gives the feel of like authenticity and sustainable, and like kind of reuse and all of that, and so yeah, so of course, like
But if
I,
people saw that as shit though, like that's kind of what I'm saying. Is like if they saw that repackaged PVC vinyl veneer on top of it, then it could potentially, like, okay, let
I,
me.
mean, I think they do kind of see it as shit eventually, it, but by that time maybe things have like moved on. It's so kind of quick, and so that's,
Yeah.
my wife like does trend kind of forecasting, and so
Oh, that's interesting.
and so she is kind of constantly sort of, so I'm a bit more aware, a bit more trend aware than I used to be, but it's like, the big problem of sustainability is it's like longer than a political cycle, it's longer than a trend cycle, it's, and so yeah, and so this is why we are where we are, maybe like,
And that's kind of part of my thinking with like the regulation sword aspect of it, right? So like, there's a book, Manufacturing Consent, by Noam Chomsky,
yeah,
and he spends like a huge bracket of it talking about the chemical industry. And he
yeah,
wrote this in like 87 or 88 or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that. And he talks about how like there's new chemicals that come out every year, that it's harder to regulate them, and that they just
yeah,
like shift something and then they can
yeah,
get around the regulation.
yeah,
So like, I think that that's also an issue that you're chasing with regulation, right?
yeah,
Versus if you can get people to care about it, well, then they're just not going to not going to do it. So like an example to this is the book Silent Spring. Are you familiar with
mhm,
this?
yeah,
Yeah. So like she just essentially explains our use of DET and other chemicals is going to make it so that songbirds are just going to die out. And then all of a sudden, everybody was like, "Whoa, what? We don't want songbirds to die out." And they
yeah,
suddenly
yeah,
cared about it.
yeah,
Where,
yeah,
if it was, and that's kind of my point of art, is that I think that it can it can bring awareness to something. Then all of a sudden, a push can come. If it's like Bob Dylan writing the song "Hurricane," still took a long
mhm,
time to get the guy out of jail. But I mean, I kind of see that that's, to me, there's like pushes and pulls, and I
yeah,
think that one that's, I don't know if it's being priced out right now of the market, is like the role of art into being
yeah,
able to push that cultural fold. Because really what we're raging against here is in my mind is like the culture. There's like the regulatory environment, which I really despise, particularly in America, of being
yeah.
allowing certain
Well, you're
things.
in Chicago as well, aren't you? That's the birth of the kind of
Oh, but
super free market, like economics, like,
well, it's also the birthplace of
value,
behavioral.
it's the only God, all of that kind of thing. Yeah,
Oh, for sure. Like the University of Chicago. University of Chicago
yeah,
also is one of the pioneers of behavioral economics more
right,
contemporarily,
yeah, yeah,
which is like the antithesis of that also.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
the Chicago, Upton Sinclair writing The Jungle, which is like, this is how you get meat processing, is like pigs on a giant wheel screaming. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah, yeah,
terrors. And
yeah,
then that got people to be like, well, what the fuck? What are we doing here?
yeah,
So, I mean, I think I do rage against the regulatory side of things. And I think the government is it's a Shakespearean tragedy in what they're allowing to happen, right? Um, but at the same time, I feel like I don't know if it makes it seem like we're going back to like these damn kids of being like more onus on people to know. But I think this kind of
That's
ties
what.
back to,
That's also what we're talking about. Is like the world is too complex for you to know. Like, I mean, okay, you're like an educated guy, like with a bit more time. Like, okay, you know, even you, like, how do you know which like antibiotic is? If there was no kind of, if there was like less and less regulation, then more and more of your time and concern is going to be like doing your research, and
oh
then
yeah,
and then and so it's like, okay, the terms and conditions, nobody reads the terms and conditions, like, and that is like a, I read a thing, it's the pointing out that that is like a complete failure, like this, it's like this
Totally.
farce, which, like, oh, we're expected to be informed. Of course we're not informed, because it's too complex. And so this idea that, yeah, we should all be like more informed, the world is too complex, I think, now to like be informed enough. And so we rely in the same, we rely on experts to be informed kind of for us. And that's like, and that's the only way it can be. And so I see that regulation ideally should be like another kind of way of like having experts being informed for us. And yeah, of course, it's not perfect, but yeah,
I'm
it
super
seems.
cynical about government these days, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I bet.
My
Yeah,
family, my family, like a lot of them are lobbyists, and just knowing, understanding the intricacies of how they get bills passed was despicable. I'm like,
yeah,
so you just bought these guys a lobster dinner and allowed them to take home 2 extra lobster dinners, and you got
yeah,
you like this, like they're that cheap?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
are you
yeah, yeah,
serious?
yeah.
So, but I
It's
do think with like I do think the internet is dying, and like the way that we, like you and I are closer in age, like the way that we grew up with the internet is
mm,
dying, and I think
mm,
it's becoming this like mad free for all, which
yeah,
is perpetuating this complexity problem. But I
yeah,
do think what's going to come out the other side of this is that we are going to have like smaller experts that we go to for certain things. It's like this guy knows everything there is to know about which laundry detergents to use, or
yeah,
like this guy's done all the research on this thing,
yeah,
because like that's like a beauty of the internet is you can find those people
yeah.
that are like, or what.
I don't want to think about which, I don't want to like have a laundry detergent which is potentially unsafe for my children, like I just like, and then that repeated like a million with all the different things that I touch in my life. Like, yeah, I know what you mean. Like regulatory capture is like insane, and we're like living in this kind of oligarchy, or
Yeah,
it, and it's kind of, it's a different world to like the 90s when I kind of grew up basically.
yeah. I
So
think I think
yeah,
we can get there with regulation. I just the I guess the point of the midterm that I'm trying to express, just to clarify, is I think the only way to get to the regulatory improvement is by, it's like the paradox of like being more informed.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
well, then how do we get there?
yeah, 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 yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. Don't know.
What are you up to these days? And the other thread I wanted to pull on is like, I love industrial design. Like, I do software development and build systems and things like that. And the design of everyday things was like the book that got me really to rethink about things. And ever since
Mm.
then, my wife probably hears it to the point of annoyance, where I'll just be trying to put something together or figure something out, and I'll just be like, "Poor design, we're returning this." Like, I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah, 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 yeah. All that. Yeah, I know. It's kind of tragic when people blame themselves for what is, for not being able to like, you know, sort of use something properly, which is actually
Yeah,
just like a really bad design. And I
yeah,
kind of see it again and again, like certainly with like UI and UX design, all of that kind of stuff.
for sure.
But yeah, so yeah, so I guess currently working on a project which is sort of investigating a lot of the points that we've been rambling about. I'm making a harmless car, and it's like another absurd and impossible thing to try and do, but it's sort of a thought experiment for thinking about like, yeah, what we value, this idea that design itself is a, you know and does the kind of orthodox idea of design, or and the idea that designers have of themselves is like, yeah, design creates value, by kind of cleverly putting things together. Um, and my kind of question for my industry, I suppose, is like, okay, well, maybe we need to think about the flip side of that more. And so, um, you know, for me, like, the Toaster project was like nearly kind of 2 decades ago now. It's like really quite, it's like this, okay, I'm going to try and make something entirely myself and think about sustainability. But as we've mentioned, like this idea about doing things in a kind of better way, or a more sustainable way, yeah, it's been like around since the 70s and before. And it, like a lot of the same similar conversations are kind of happening again and again in a new form. And yet here we are, kind of barreling towards this like extremely worrying kind of future. I think, the trend lines on the kind of CO2 graphs and the kind of temperature graphs are just like, yeah, this is happening. So yeah, and so it's like I started thinking, okay, well, designers have been trying to like make something better for like decades and decades and decades. Well, how about like lowering our ambition a bit and just making something which is like neutral? Could you make something which is kind of, which doesn't make anything better but doesn't make anything worse? Um, could you make something harmless? And I've kind of come to the conclusion that no, you couldn't, uh, because and so then the natural kind of follow on question is, okay, well, if you can't be harmless, then you have to decide who to harm. And
Mm.
so I I'm trying to like investigate this idea of like design as a practice, which is deciding who should be harmed, whose life should be harmed rather than whose life should be improved. And in a way, it's kind of really the same thing. And so, yeah, and so it's a way of throwing a bit more light on the choices which are kind of implicit in all of the like things that designers design, and it's this, it sort of feels maybe like we're in a bit more of a zero sum world.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of we've moved from a cowboy plane type world to this like Buckminster Fuller spaceship Earth. And so it's like if you're going to give to someone, you're taking from someone else, and that someone else can be like geographic, or it can be kind of temporal. And it seems, and it's like this sort of gets back to this like discounting the future and all of that. And it's like, we're sort of, yeah, are we like taking from the future to kind of, improve our kind of present lives in like marginal ways, like, toasters and hair straighteners and stuff.
Oh, I think that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that about sums up our whole fucking economy.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
yeah,
we're,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
what's that like Greek proverb of like society is better when men plant trees whose shade they'll never see? Like, we're doing the exact opposite. We're burning down fucking forests for what? You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like, it's
yeah, yeah,
uh, I like that though. Of like, it's such an interesting. It's almost like a koan of what you're saying is like choosing who to harm versus choosing not to harm. It's also that's actually pretty like zen in a way, because there's like it's like a story of like the two monks, and one monk went around with a sweeper everywhere he went to like uh um get all the bugs out of his path, and then the other one goes, just walk and they'll move. It's like if they don't move, it's on them, kind of thing,
yeah, yeah,
uh which is, it's almost a similar vein to this, because I mean, this goes back to the regulation thing, is what we're talking about, the textiles of like, well,
yeah,
we
yeah,
didn't, I wasn't involved in the room, but somebody chose to
yeah,
export those,
yeah,
and as opposed to doing it here, which what you're essentially saying is, well, let's be more intentional with that, which I really dig.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I sort of, as I said, I think it's just like the flip side of the coin, and and yeah, and somehow like pointing it out is seems important to me. I don't know that there is, this like, okay, let's make this better decision or whatever, um, but then also let's think about who it's being made worse for. Um, yeah, and I also think it relates to this, like, okay, we use we a lot, and it's like this renegotiation of uh, who counts as like we. I
Mm.
think is kind of definitely like the conversation of our time a bit, or one of the main conversations that you know that
I
is
think it's also
happening.
timeless, though. I mean, like, look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
every, like, there's so many languages in the world that the word for person is actually synonymous with your people.
yes, yeah, 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 yeah. And another project I did was this project where I tried to become a goat to take a holiday from being a human being, and that was a yeah. It kind of relates to that idea of like, there are interesting ideas about like ecosystems, and in some parts of the world now have like a legal kind of personhood, and they have people
Yeah.
advocating them in a court of law and stuff like that, which I think is really interesting as like, okay, well, you know if corporations can be people, can an ecosystem be a person, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think there's like an enlargement happening and a kind of renegotiation happening, and so it's like who gets to be harmed is like, yeah, by this harmless car, which, because it's impossible to be harmless, so you've got to choose, and so who would you choose? It becomes like this, um, yeah, a very clear kind of ethical question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that ties right into the philosophy, which is what I was saying. I always end up getting to it. I don't know if it's just like, I mean, it's obviously just part of my interest, I suppose. But I always think of like, I always get to a certain point, and then it goes, the common denominator is the way you think about it, because everything else, just you shake away everything else. It's coloring it in some way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, and so who do you think should be harmed then?
Not
If
my people.
Huh?
Not my people, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yes, yeah.
Where are
But
you at with that? Or go where you finish your thought.
oh well, so yeah, so kind of, I guess, first prototype. I've been like weaving this kind of space frame chassis out of willow, like coppiced willow, and kind of given this car like these huge wheels, huge like pneumatic wheels, which kind of spread the load on the ground, because it's like if they happens to like roll over a snail or something like that, or any other creature, it should just kind of roll over this thing. And yeah, and it it's kind of, there's something I like about the look, but
It looks pretty like steampunk meets Mad Max kind of.
yeah, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's it's a vision of something. I don't know if it's like, uh, and so yeah, but like the logic of the project really breaks down, because of course you can't like have a car which doesn't harm anything, and so anyway, so it's kind of, there's something annoying me about the project as well. I'm sort of like at the beginnings of it, and I don't really know where to go with it, and like how do you power it, and it's sort of yeah, yeah, but there's something nice about it too, because it's sort of a tool for like imagining an alternative vision of the future, a bit as well. But there's, it's like you just put electric motors on it, but then you know.
Or a bunch of high gear ratios and a pedal powertrain, so you can get
Yeah, I
three.
know. But then it sort of stops being a car, and so
Uh,
yeah, it's difficult.
well, I dig it.
Yeah,
I like where your head is at with a lot of your projects. I saw the harmless car, and this was the next thing I came up going into after the toaster. So, but
right.
hey, I know we're up at time here, but
Yeah,
thank you again. This was a fun. I'd love to keep
okay.
in touch. I'm gonna definitely see what you're doing with the harmless car, and maybe at some point when you're down the road, you can get back on and chat
Cool.
about all the
Okay.
agita that you had with that one.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, JR. It's been very nice talking. Yeah, I don't know if we quite, answered our questions. There's no answer to the questions that we're asking, I think, or that are occupying us. But yeah, it's been really
We
fun.
further refined the question, which is
Yeah,
some points
yeah,
maybe even more useful.
yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and if anything, we explained how complex things are and how it's not going to be solved by any two people on a podcast
Yes.
within
Yeah.
60
Yeah.
minutes.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Cool. All
Thanks.
right.
Well, I'll hit the stop to the recording. Is there anything you wanted to mention? I'll definitely put all your information in the show notes for folks to find you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Hopefully, it's intelligible. It's like, oh god, I feel like I'm just like rambling like a, you know, sort of semi-informed kind of person, but I don't know. Yeah.
what it's like, it's Socrates. Socrates is like, what is wisdom? He's like, all I know is I know nothing. So I mean,
Yes,
it's you at
yeah.
least know
Good. Yeah, I'm
the
definitely
thinking.
Socrates. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks.
Cool.